This was a crash of a UFO, and there appear to have been two ET non-human beings who escaped from the crash, and one of whom was taken to the hospital and was examined there, but died. 3.5 to 4 foot tall, hairless, large head, large eyes, long arms hanging down below his knees. And they are going to be presenting official autopsy evidence of the body of this ET being.
My name is Danny Sheehan. I'm a constitutional litigator who's worked some of the most important cases in modern American history. From Pentagon Papers, the Watergate scandal, to Iran-Contra. My legal career has led me now to this pivotal moment. As our human family confronts the implications of the existence here on our planet of extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional non-human species. I will be your guide as we dive into the profound philosophical, theological, and public policy questions pertaining to the UFO phenomenon, alien life, and the citizen movement for disclosure. This is the Full Disclosure Podcast, coming to you from the New Paradigm Institute on SpectraVision Radio.
Hello, my friends. This is a period of some really substantial instability here in our country and on our planet. We have a massive number of demonstrations going on in the streets here in the United States, around the country, protesting the killing of an American citizen by ICE agents in Minneapolis, Minnesota. President Trump has now ordered an additional 1,000 U.S. military forces, law enforcement people into Minneapolis to put down these demonstrations. This is a major danger here in our country right now. The deployment of these federal law enforcement people as a basic domestic police force here in our country. There are protests going in now against that activity on the part of President Trump. At the same time, President Trump is having to respond to a major vote coming up tomorrow on January 15th in the Congress of a War Powers Act resolution on the part of our United States Congress, compelling President Trump to refrain from engaging in any more military activities against Venezuela unless and until Congress has actually passed a specific regulation authorizing him to do this. He is defying them. He is threatening. He has demanded that anybody who votes for this in the Republican Party have a primary election to unseat them. He is threatening to obviously veto any such resolution, which is completely incompatible with the entire purpose of the War Powers Act. So this is a moment of considerable instability here domestically. At the same time, ironically enough, or contradictorily enough, President Trump is threatening to actually engage in military operations, to order military operations on the part of the United States Pentagon and the Central Intelligence Agency against the government of Iran, ostensibly because of the threat of the Iranian government to try to put down demonstrations against that government. So President Trump is at one and the same time sending U.S. military and law enforcement people into the city of Minneapolis, Minnesota, to put down disturbances there in demonstrations against the killing of American citizens by these ICE agents and their ongoing extraordinarily aggressive campaign to search out people, not only people who are allegedly illegal immigrants and undocumented immigrants here in our country, but also people whom they believe to be troublemakers and engaged in unlawful activity. This is quite an extraordinary moment in our American history right now, and I want to address that today. But let me touch first on two major news stories that have happened since our last meeting, and then I'll also be talking about a story that we're going to be releasing tomorrow in an interview on the Liberation Times podcast with Chris Sharp. The CIA has now officially refused to respond to official interrogatories that have been submitted to the CIA by the House Oversight Committee, their task force on the declassification of government secrets. The member of the task force who is now responsible for the UFO issue is Congressman Eric Burleson from Missouri. He and his staff have forwarded to the CIA a number of interrogatories directed to them. The CIA has refused to answer them and instead asserted that the committee will have to go to AARO to deal with AARO on anything having to do with the UFO phenomenon. This is a flagrant violation of law on the part of the Central Intelligence Agency, refusing to respond to a direct demand for information on the part of the Congressional Oversight Committee in the House. Because of this, there is now being discussed in the task force the potential request for subpoenas, official subpoenas, to be issued to the Central Intelligence Agency by James Comer, who is the chairman of the House Oversight Committee. This is another moment of considerable instability in this confrontation going on between the United States Congress and the executive branch over the ability of Congress to oversee the executive branch in its activities with regard to the UFO phenomenon. So this is a major confrontation that is brewing here in the House of Representatives, in addition to confrontation on the part of Congress to the executive branch for their being able to engage in criminal warfare activities without any kind of authorization from Congress. The director and producer of the UFO documentary film having to do with the UFO and ET sightings down in Brazil that happened in 1996, The Moment of Contact, that is produced and directed by James Fox. James Fox has now announced that on January 20th, next Tuesday, basically a week from now, there's going to be a major press conference held at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., and James Fox is going to be there with a number of personal witnesses to this event that took place back on January 20th of 1996. So this is on the anniversary day of the events that took place back in 1996 in Brazil, in this town called Virginia. This was a crash of a UFO, and there appear to have been two ET non-human beings who escaped from the crash, and one of whom was taken to the hospital and was examined there, but died there. They're going to be presenting at this January 20th upcoming press conference Dr. Talio Venturelli. He is the neurosurgeon who tried to save the life of the ET, who is described as a 3.5 to 4 foot tall, hairless, large head, large eyes, long arms hanging down below his knees, ET being, non-human being, whom Dr. Venturelli says he examined, and they are going to be presenting official autopsy evidence of the body of this ET being. There's going to be a second doctor there who is going to be testifying, and this is Dr. Armando Fortunato. He is a major bacteriologist who examined the bacteria that was found on the body of this being, this ET being, which resulted in the death of one of the police officers who had carried the ET's body to the hospital. This police officer died a short while later of of a completely unknown infection, which turned out to be this bacteriological infection suffered from his direct physical contact with this being. Both of these medical doctors are going to be there at the press conference. There's an additional eyewitness, Carlos de Sousa, who witnessed these entire events, will be there. So this is a January 20th National Press Club press conference that's going to be hosted by James Fox, and we call this to your attention. We don't know whether this might be televised over C-SPAN or some other source, but they will obviously be videoing this press conference, and these will be available. If you are in the Washington, D.C. area, you can go to the press club. We're going to have our Washington representative, Kevin Wright, will be there, and also the Paradigm Research Group, Stephen Bassett, I'm sure will be there. We may be talking with them in the interim about the events that take place there. The January 9th interview of David Grush was an interview by Megyn Kelly. It is now posted on YouTube, and I highly recommend that you watch the entire interview. But in the interview, David Grush identified Dick Cheney, former Vice President Dick Cheney, who was the Secretary of Defense in the Bush Senior administration. This is an extraordinarily important event that has occurred here. This is the first time that David Grush has agreed publicly to name any member of the Legacy Group. He has now pushed the ball forward. He had agreed to tell this information to the House Oversight Committee behind closed doors during his earlier testimony in July of 2023. But here he has now come forward, instigating an additional amount of information now in the public domain. He's named Dick Cheney as the primary coordinator of the Legacy Group up until his death on November 3rd of 2025. This is now just 60 days ago or so. Up until that time, Dick Cheney, according to David Grush, was in fact the principal coordinator of the Legacy Group. This is an extremely important piece of information because David Grush was in fact on the UAP task force officially appointed by the United States Defense Department to help investigate the UFO issue. They were the progeny of the original ALSAP program, the Advanced Weapons Special Access Program that was chaired by Jay Stratton, which employed Lou Elizondo earlier. So this is an extremely important source of this information. David Grush asserting that Dick Cheney was, in effect, the coordinator of this group that has been historically referred to as the MJ-12 group, the Majestic group. So he would be Majestic 1, MJ1. And extraordinarily important, in this very same interview, David Grush then named James Clapper, the 3-star general in the United States Air Force, and later the Director of National Intelligence, naming him as the person in the United States Air Force that not only oversaw, but actually deployed the teams of the United States Air Force to recover UFOs, to be taking them into custody and having them reverse engineered to potentially create additional vehicles on the part of the United States military and potentially propulsion systems to propel U.S. platforms for delivering nuclear weapons, asserting that Grush was in the room directly with Clapper deploying people to recover UFOs and to appoint people into the Air Force to be in charge of this particular operation. This puts James Clapper also in the Legacy Group, along with Dick Cheney. And I will point out to you that we have undertaken an investigation here at the New Paradigm Institute and have discovered now a third person who obviously was part of this Legacy Group. And I am going to be being interviewed live on the Liberation Times by Chris Sharp. I've been asked to refrain from revealing the name and the description and identity of this person here today in this particular podcast because the Liberation Times has a much, much larger listening audience. But I am directing you today to go to this release of the Liberation Times. It'll be released right the same day as the release of this podcast to you. I will be naming the third person whom we have now identified as a member of the Legacy Group very recently. In fact, I would argue is still a member of the Legacy Group and therefore subject to potential subpoena by the United States Congress. Now, strangely enough, closely related to this is the report of the Liberation Times, Chris Sharp's story that came out just yesterday that has identified the U.S. Naval Air Station on the Pawtuxet River in Maryland as the location of the storage of one of the UFOs that has been in the possession of the United States government. This is a major hangar on the Pawtuxet River. This was submitted to the United States Congress in written testimony by Lou Elizondo. And as you all know, that I am the attorney for Lou Elizondo that participated with Lou in the preparation of his testimony to the Inspector General of the Defense Department and his filing of the complaint with the Inspector General of the United States Defense Department, asserting not only that he was being retaliated against for his revelation to the New York Times of the existence of the videos, the gun camera videos from the F-18 Super Hornets, videoing Tic Tac, the famous Tic Tac, and the other two major UFOs at that time. This is the continued unfolding of the revelations that are being made now about the UFO phenomenon. And this Liberation Times article now publicly identifies this location. Now, I had, in fact, known about this location prior to this particular article being released right now. Just to give you some idea of this, this is because the written testimony that was submitted by Lou Elizondo to the United States Congress sets this information forth. This article that I refer you to, the Liberation Times article of January 13th by Chris Sharp, talks about the details of this particular site on the Pawtuxet River, this large hangar in which this UFO craft was being secretly stored, was in fact the target for much of the drone activity that was going on coming out of New Jersey, because this particular location on the Pawtuxet River is right along the border between Maryland and New Jersey. And this was the target of a lot of those drone activities. And in fact, there is a Defense Department study now that has been undertaken that has identified a significant percentage of those surveillance vehicles as UAPs or UFOs, in addition to, interestingly, one or more Chinese drone inspecting this particular location. So I think that the reason why we're able to make this public now is almost certainly because that UFO has been moved from this major hangar. They moved it on a barge that comes up the Pawtuxet River so that they could put it on the barge and cover it up and take it out of there. We don't know yet where it has been taken, but this is the first time that there's ever been a public revelation of a specific site where a live UFO craft, this was a major intact craft that was kept at this major hangar at the U.S. Naval Air Station on the Pawtuxet River in Maryland. So these are major stories that are broken in just the last week. This is an extraordinarily important period in our American history for a number of reasons that I want to review. Now, my whole life has been devoted to the investigation and study of the national security state. Ever since basically graduating from Harvard Law School, when I became one of the attorneys for the New York Times, when we got into the major confrontation with the United States government, the executive branch of the government, that was attempting to stop us at the New York Times from publishing the 47 volumes of the top secret documents that had been prepared by the Rand Corporation revealing the internal messaging and trafficking going on inside the United States military are all around the Vietnam War, which, as you recall, revealed the fact that the Bay of Tonkin event was completely falsified by Lyndon Johnson to trigger his sending in 500,000 United States military into Vietnam. And because of my engagement as one of the attorneys for the New York Times, I began to become more and more familiar with the covert operations of the United States military and the Central Intelligence Agency and our intelligence community. And as you know, over the years, when I then went to Jesuit headquarters, I had been contacted back in 1976, immediately after the election of President Carter, who had seen a UFO, and he demanded that the CIA turn over the UFO information to him. And the CIA director at that time, George Bush Sr., refused to do this. And because of that, President Carter directed an investigation by the Congressional Research Service, and I had been contacted by the head of the Science and Technology Division of the Library of Congress's Congressional Research Group, and that's how I got engaged in this professionally. And what we've learned now is that it was the Science and Technology Division of the Central Intelligence Agency that has been the major coordinator and overseer of a lot of this activity, this secret activity and criminal activity, indeed, on the part of the executive branch in shooting down and capturing UFOs and their occupants, kidnapping the UFO beings that now must be still somewhere kept in captivity, because there's been a number of these recoveries of intact craft, and they reported now the bodies, which they call biological evidence of the non-human nature of the occupants. But we know from our own direct interview of individuals that living non-human beings have been taken into custody by the United States executive branch. One of them that we know, that S4 in Nevada, where that being was interviewed. And I've talked to a direct eyewitness who has seen that interview conducted. So this information is now starting to come out. And David Grush has indicated that he knows a lot more than he has yet made public. But he, in his interview of January 9th with Megyn Kelly, has called upon the 34 people that were interviewed in The Age of Disclosure, this major documentary film, which I, again, recommend to you if you have not yet seen this. This has occurred now as of November 21st of 2025. We're just basically 2 months into this, 60 days, but this process is now starting to unfold. We now have the names of at least 2 of the members of the Legacy Group, comparatively current members as of November of 2025. We now have the name of a third person, which we're going to be revealing in the podcast that I've referred you to, the Liberation Times interview by Chris Sharp. We've got Grush now starting to give out information. We've got the revelation now of the actual physical location of one of the UFOs. This is now starting to happen all during the period of this extreme instability inside our country domestically, with massive demonstrations going on in the streets against the President of the United States and the unlawful activity that he's engaged in, sending military forces into the cities of our country, and now threatening again major military force against another nation, a member of the United Nations, and actually talking about engaging in military operations, against potentially Mexico and potentially Colombia and potentially Cuba. And now, as of this week, threatening direct military strikes against Iran without any authorization from the United States Congress, which is an absolute violation of Article 1 of the Constitution of the United States. I want you to pay attention to our podcast from this point forward. We've been basically walking slowly up toward this particular moment in our earlier 2025 broadcasts of this particular Full Disclosure podcast. But I'm suggesting that you now stay tuned. Call your friends, your neighbors, get them to sign up to become members of this particular podcast. This is the Full Disclosure Podcast, brought to you over Spectra Vision Radio. My name is Dan Sheehan. I'm the president of the New Paradigm Institute. Please come back next week for an update on all of these stories.
To join the citizen movement for disclosure, visit newparadigminstitute.org/take action.